This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com with a daily combat sports news update for you. As I was driving back from the gym tonight, since I have to train in Quebec because the gyms are still closed here in Ontario because of the lockdown, it's about a 45-minute drive home. I heard Erich Bischoff's podcast was going to have Tony Khan on, so I was thinking I could listen to it on the way home. I didn't even last 5 minutes. I hadn't listened to Bischoff's podcast for a while because it became too much advertising, too much of Eric talking about fucking his wife when he's a senior citizen. But the reason I couldn't listen to it is just Tony Khan is on there comparing himself to Erich Bischoff. AEW started last October. It hasn't even been out a year. They started with a rating in the 0.6s. They started at 0.68. Not even a year into their run, they're in the 0.2s. They recently got a 0.22 rating. WCW once had a rating in the sixes when Kevin Sullivan was booking. They regularly had ratings in the fives for Nitro. WCW had so many stars. It was so entertaining. Even at its worst, it was way more entertaining than AEW. I sat through pretty much every episode, or episode as you guys like to correct me on, of Nitro and Thunder. And when I could, Saturday night was pretty bad towards the end. Maybe that was Penzer's booking because it was Penzer and Jimmy Hart, but I sat through every episode of Nitro and Thunder until the end. I can't even watch 5 minutes of AEW because it actually angers me to watch it because it's so bad. And it's like an insult to me because it's almost like a slap in the face to the business that I love. But I understand Tony Khan's father is a multi-billionaire. He can spend his money on whatever he wants. But Bischoff was into wrestling as a job. It was a job for him. Tony Khan is a money mark. There's a difference between the two. And Erich Bischoff was cool. I don't like hearing him talk about fucking his wife when he's in his 60s or however old he is now. He's definitely a senior citizen. That's kind of gross. But he is a cool guy when he was running WCW. His product was good. He put good people in charge like Kevin Sullivan. He doesn't have the inmates running the asylum like the executives do in AEW. So I just want to say I don't see any comparison to AEW at WCW. Even when WCW was at its absolute worst, it was still far more entertaining than AEW, which, as I said, hasn't even been on a year, and they're getting 0.22 ratings. In other AEW news, I guess DDP kind of outed QT Marshall today as having COVID-19. I guess he's one of the AEW wrestlers. I don't know much about him. The USA Network apparently signed a new deal for WWE to air Raw on their network back in 2018. It's a 5-year deal worth $1.3 billion. So for the people that say ratings don't matter, the USA Network is paying WWE $1.3 billion over 5 years for Raw, which had its lowest all-time viewership for Monday's episode, featuring the WrestleMania rematch between the Average Joe, Kevin Owens. Actually, he's not average because the Average Joe isn't as fat as he is. The Average Joe is actually in better shape than Kevin Owens. which is probably why only the hardcorest of the hardcore are still watching wrestling. They got a 0.48 rating, was not the lowest rating ever. The lowest rating for Raw ever was a 0.46, but the actual viewership was low. It was the lowest, lower than in the 90s before the Attitude Era, when everyone makes fun of that time period of being absolutely horrible for WWE, while less people are watching it now. For all of the people that like to make fun of it. And I mean, even in the UK, they don't find it that interesting. I interviewed a lady that follows wrestling very closely from the UK today, Just Jessie, and she discussed it, and she had some ideas for what can make wrestling cool again. But I mean, even her, who's way more of a fan of the current products than me, says this idea of the match with Rey Mysterio and Seth Rollins, someone is going to lose an eye, is dumb. It is dumb. Nobody believes anyone's going to lose an eye. And man, I got to stop reading these Drew McDonald or Drew McIntyre articles. He did another interview. I think it was in the New York Post. He's having a match at this pay-per-view against Dolph Ziggler. Boy, that's kind of equal pay-per-view buys. But not only that, and I don't have a problem with Dolph Ziggler. I don't have a problem with him at all, by the way. But McIntyre is once again putting over his opponent before he wrestles him, and not even trying to keep much of a semblance of kayfabe. It's like, why do we want to see it? You're letting the magician's tricks out of the bag in your promotion for the Magic Show. Why the hell do I want to see it? I don't doubt Drew McIntyre's a nice guy. This girl that I interviewed today from the UK says Scottish people that watch wrestling think he's a nice guy, and they're proud that they have a Scottish person as champion. I mean, the first WWE champion to wear a skirt, I believe. The first ever WWE champion that wears a skirt is Drew McIntyre. So, of course, they're proud. But I don't find him interesting. I'm sure he's very nice. But when you completely break kayfabe all the time, I don't think you're cool. You actually just piss me off. Maybe you could throw him on my list of people I'd like to have an MMA fight with, along with some others that I won't even bother naming. Saturday's UFC 251 prelims did 809,000 viewers and a 0.31 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. Those were the preliminary fights that aired prior to the pay-per-view, which I believe did somewhere around 1.3 million buys for Masvidal taking the last-minute fight against Usman. And by the way, Masvidal says he wants his next fight to be a rematch with Usman, as he took this fight on 6 days' notice. And for the people that say that's an excuse, it is actually a legitimate excuse. And I'm neutral in this. I mean, I'm not really a fan of lightweights, but I do respect both Usman and Masvidal. I've watched both of their training videos, but I'm not like a fan really of either one of them. But as somebody who has amateur wrestled, probably 1,000 amateur wrestling matches, has done 3 kickboxing exhibitions, I can tell you, even in pro wrestling, on 6 days' notice, if I'm supposed to wrestle, like, I mean, I'm always training, but if I'm supposed to wrestle the most fit wrestler in the world, which I don't even know who that would be right now, maybe let's say it was Kurt Angle in his prime. If I only had 6 days to train, I would not be able to even perform as a pro wrestler as good as if I had at least 4 to 8 weeks to train for the match. And in an MMA fight, it's the same thing, particularly during the lockdown, where it's more difficult to train unless you already have a camp together. So I do believe, even though many people said that was a boring fight, I did not see it. So I don't know how many people are going to want to watch it again, but they could build it up. One thing UFC is great at is hyping up fights, which is something that wrestling is failing at. I think the most excited I remember fans being for a wrestling match in recent memory was Brock Lesnar against Goldberg the first time that they wrestled. I think, to my recollection, that was the last time people were really excited the first time, because people didn't really know who was going to win. And it was kind of a shock that Goldberg won that, because it was like a quick squash match. And I think that was really the last time I remember like there actually being a buzz about a match, to be honest. And that was numerous years ago now. So that's the news of the day. 747 Rocco says he's not a Khan fan. AEW sucks. Who does the stutter better, Tony Khan or Kevin Owens? I mean, it's so sad that we go from Steve Austin, who was cool, a superstar in the mainstream, a legitimate ass kicker, a legitimate athlete, former football player, worked on the docks. I mean, you know, Steve Austin is just a good guy, and he's a man's man. And now we have Kevin Owens, this big fat guy that doesn't look like he's seen a gym in his life, wearing a shirt, try to rip off Steve Austin's move, which I'm sure Steve Austin allows him to do, because he can't do it anywhere near as good as Austin. And every time I see him attempt to pull off a stunner, it just reminds me of how much better Steve Austin is, and it makes me miss the Attitude Era. So I understand why Steve Austin allowed him to use that move. Jefferson E. White says, what are the odds that Billy Jack Haynes was abducted by a UFO? Billy Jack Haynes, I don't believe his agent, Eric Sims, has heard from him. Last I talked to Eric Sims, he hadn't heard from him. I have not heard from Billy Jack since the Oregon wrestling legend Rip Oliver passed. And he was calling me pretty regularly prior to that. His phones that I did have the numbers for have been shut off. I don't know where he is. Do I think he was abducted? No. I do know he has a lot of health problems, and I sincerely hope he's okay. He's also kind of a quiet guy, and he could just be mad that, like, you know, most of these older wrestlers make extra cash from autograph appearances, and with this lockdown, it's screwed over a number of his autograph appearances. So maybe he's just decided to disappear. Who knows? I hope he's all right. I hope that he's living somewhere and he's doing okay. Mediterranean Mudcake says, for Tony Khan, AEW is a hobby, not a job. And I will mention this, that Tony Khan was mentioning during this podcast that the Khan family has donated about $1 million or something to a charity. But just for people that don't know, if you make a charitable donation and you're a billionaire, it's a tax deduction. When you have huge profits in your overall businesses, you're going to pay a lot of taxes. So when you make charitable donations and $1 million to a multi-billionaire is nothing, it actually helps you out in your taxes. So I do think it's great that they do work with charities. If there's one good thing about AEW, it's that. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I do admire their charitable stuff, but it is a tax deduction. Someone says AEW wishes it was WCW. Nikki T727 said, I lasted less than 5 minutes listening to Khan. You're right. Can't even compare the two. Bischoff made WCW a must watch, and you didn't want to miss a minute of it. Tony Branco says WCW was incredibly entertaining in 97 and 98. I agree. For some reason, for me, I always liked WCW better than WWE once I found out about it. Maybe it's because we only got it on tape, and I didn't have TBS at my house when I was young. So when I would rent the tapes, it was like something really special and cool. And then when Nitro got popular, it wasn't all the way always available in Canada, but maybe within a year of its beginning, they started airing it in Canada. And I don't know, I was always a fan of it. And I would get the pay-per-view. No, I wouldn't actually get them. My parents would never let me buy a pay-per-view, but friends would get it and loan me the tapes. So I would watch most of the WCW pay-per-views. I was a fan. And as I said, even when it got worse, I still watched every single Nitro and Thunder. I really don't think I missed one. Someone says lots of super kicks in AEW. Aaron Raven says Dolph sucks. He might not be the most entertaining wrestler or the best person to put in a main event. But from what I understand, he was an amateur wrestler. So, you know what? I was an amateur wrestler too. I got to give him credit for that. I can't believe he had sex with Sonny. I watched the shoot interview clip of Sonny talking about having sex with Dolph. And oh boy. I mean, Matthew Granahan, the king of Connecticut, has had sex with Sonny. I post some of his videos from time to time. I believe Johnny Devine, Alex Silva, a whole list of people have been in that club. But Dolph Ziggler would have had her after she's had a lot of notches on her belt. So that's a little disturbing. Terry Harper says WWE are their own worst enemies. AJRX. I've said this before. I don't purposely say Drew McDonald. There was a Scottish wrestler called Drew McDonald that was really popular. That's just what the confusion is. And I'm not doing it on purpose. They sound similar to me. Richard Min says the 1998 Nitro ring was awesome. Nacho Man 64 says Dolph blew him off at a local gym when he tried to say hi. I don't think I ever met Dolph, other than maybe when I was getting extra jobs with WWE when he's a member of the Spirit Squad. But I don't have any specific memories of meeting him. If I did, it would have just been to say hi. But I think, if anything, it would have been that, but I don't recall it. Someone wants me to interview Jerry Flynn. Find his contact info. Send it to greatnorthwrestling@gmail.com. The people that want me to interview people, send me their contact information, because I don't know, like Jerry Flynn, he's been out of the business forever. How am I supposed to just track this guy down, for instance? Terry Harper says perhaps Mabel had sex with Sonny too. Somebody told me today I appeared on an Irish podcast with the guy from Keeping It 100 and Hughesney or something like that. And he told me Ahmed Johnson supposedly had sex with Sonny. And by the way, I really want to do a shoot interview with Ahmed Johnson, but I saw a picture of him recently, and he's like 400 pounds, maybe more. He doesn't even look anything like the Ahmed Johnson from the WWE. It's crazy the amount of weight that he's gained. And one memory about Ahmed Johnson that stands out to me is my father is a big bird watcher, okay? And whenever we would go to wrestling matches, he always found it interesting to watch the wrestling through his binoculars. And I remember the night after Survivor Series 97, Ahmed Johnson had a match on the show in Ottawa, my town where the Raw was the night after. And I remember my dad telling me that he thought the opponent looked really hurt. Like, my father was genuinely concerned for the opponent, and he said he could tell through the binoculars that there was something more than just a performance from the guy getting hurt. And at that time, I didn't know about Ahmed's reputation of hurting people. So I find it funny thinking back to it all these years later that my father was probably right. Ahmed Johnson probably did hurt that jobber that night. Necron99, a.k.a. Sammy Boy, tipped me $4.99. Thank you, my good man. He says, I am an asset to the industry and one of the reasons I got back into wrestling. He was out since 2005. Thank you, my good man, and I appreciate the tip. I'm supposed to interview Raven tomorrow, and I'm going to keep working on more interviews. Someone actually complained about the interview I did with this Jessie UK girl, who I wanted to get some information from the UK wrestling scene and also talk to somebody that's actually a bit of a fan of the current product for a change, to show that I'm not all negative all the time. And someone actually wrote a comment complaining about her cleavage. If anybody could believe that, like, what's wrong with people? Like, if she wants to show off, who the hell cares? But, like, it's up to the person how they want to dress, and if they're blessed, why care? Why bother writing a rude comment? Stevie Device says you can't compare pro wrestling conditioning to MMA conditioning. I'm not comparing pro wrestling to MMA conditioning. I'm just saying that even in pro wrestling, it does make a difference if you haven't been training. You cannot, like, put on as high a quality of a match. But MMA, yes, you will actually get your ass kicked if you're not highly conditioned. I don't think Masvidal was totally out of shape, but he didn't do a fight camp. So, yes, that was an unfair advantage, but we still haven't heard the purse that Masvidal got. And I'll be very interested to see that purse, because I'm sure there was some sort of large financial incentive for Masvidal taking that fight. The only thing I've read so far is that, according to most reports, it seems that Masvidal and Usman both got at least over $500,000. But I would like to know the real numbers, which I will find out. Jefferson E. White says Masvidal also got points on the pay-per-view buys, which were $1.3 million, which means that, yeah, he probably made a lot of money. Wonder when the last wrestling pay-per-view was that had 1.3 million buys. But thanks everyone for your questions and comments. I've gone on now for over 20 minutes, so I'll call it a night.